When I was young, I think 5 or 6, our house had a Japanese-style room, and in that room we had a Kyoto doll. And that doll, well, every night it moved. When I was young, I always went to bed around 10 o'clock. I also loved my grandmother a lot, so we always slept in the same room as well. And every night around 3 a.m, I always woke up. When I looked over, I always saw that doll walking towards us from the end of the hall. "Grandma, the doll!" I would say, scared. She would go over to the hall and move her hands like she was shooing the doll away. And then the doll always disappeared. But in the morning, whenever I checked the doll, it was always in its special case. This went on night after night after night. More than 10 years passed, and one day we were sharing somewhat scary stories as a family. That reminded me of the doll, so I told them about how when I was younger, I often dreamt about that doll walking down the hall. "Oh yeah, when you were younger, you always used to go on about that doll walking around," my grandmother said. "You always woke me up around 3 a.m. to get rid of something I couldn't even see." I froze. So, that wasn't a dream then? Hey guys, I'm your host Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. In case you missed it, Toshiden Exploring Japanese Urban Legends Volume 4 is now available. Once again, there are a host of new legends to explore, both horrifying, bizarre, and otherwise. And of course, a new season of the podcast to go with it. That season has almost reached its end, so if you haven't checked it out yet, it's available right now. Welcome to the last episode of Kowabana for 2025. I'm not going to lie, this has been a pretty rough year for me health-wise, and sadly, there's still no end in sight. But I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to each and every one of you for all of your support. Whether we've spoken directly or you've just left a comment or two, or even if you just listen, your support through all of this really does mean the world to me. And I hope that, in turn, you've found some enjoyment from this show as well. Here's to a hopefully healthier, safer, and happier year for us all. That being said, this week, let's see the year out by looking at some creepy tales of haunted dolls. First up, a young child has a doll they love and adore during the day. But at night, they don't want that thing to be anywhere nearby. And why does it seem to keep moving at night anyway? Find out in Chappy. This story is something my family and I experienced, and it's scary precisely because it actually happened to us. It might not be that scary in words, and you've probably heard something like this before, but let me tell you about the doll in our house that moved around. This is my first time writing here, so it might be a little difficult to read. The house we lived in was seemingly haunted, and ghostly tapping and poltergeist activity were an almost daily occurrence. It wasn't until I was a junior high student that I learnt that our house was apparently built on a spirit path. But it wasn't like I had a sixth sense as a kid. But even then, I was still terrified of my parents' bedroom on the second floor. Even now, I'm still scared of it. Apparently, I cried daily because I was so scared of it, and I was even scared of the stairs leading up there. And so, my gentle grandfather suggested that I sleep with my grandparents in their granny flat away from the main house. I agreed right away, and so my grandfather informed my parents. Thanks to that, I was able to get away from that scary room on the second floor. I hadn't even moved in before I started demanding all sorts of things, which I knew my grandparents would give me. I wanted this blanket. It had to be this towel and no other. My pillow had to go here, etc., etc. And even now, I still can't sleep unless I have my favourite stuffed toy by my pillow. The story I'm about to tell you is mostly what I heard from my family. I don't remember much of it myself. I had a doll called Chappy. It was the type of doll that would close its eyes when you held it like a baby. I always played with it during the day, but at night, it scared me, so I put it far away. I don't know why. I always asked my grandparents and older siblings to put Chappy in the piano room that was far from my grandparents' room before I could sleep. But for some reason, every morning, I woke up to find Chappy sitting on top of me. Although I was the one that doted on Chappy during the day, it seems Chappy was the one doing that to me at night. My older sister and brother found it really creepy. My sister was 9 years older than me, my brother 7, but they often played with me. The two of them asked my mother to throw Chappy away, and she found it creepy from the moment she first laid eyes on it, so she agreed with a strained laugh. They then tried to convince me, and I agreed. I don't remember anything from that time, but I think I didn't hesitate to do what my siblings asked of me. I think I was just happy that they cared about me. And so, we threw out the doll. My brother and sister jokingly called it Chucky instead of Chappy, and before long, I did too. I remember them laughing and saying, "That cursed doll is gonna come and kill us all!" Quite some time passed, and one day I was helping my older sister clean when she found a black vinyl bag in the cupboard near the family altar. She couldn't remember what was inside it, so she decided to open it. She took the bag out of the cupboard, but as soon as she saw it in the bright light, she screamed. Hearing her scream, our brother came running, but then he screamed in surprise as well, while our mother watched on in silence. That black bag was moving, like something inside was trying to break out. As it moved, we could clearly make out a head and arms. And, like it possessed a will of its own, a right arm poked out of the bag. It was Chappy's, who we had all forgotten about by that point. At the time, they put Chappy in a bag before I got home from school, and then burned him in the yard. They weren't as strict on burning things back then. Nobody ever saw that doll moving on its own, but the one thing my brother and sister could definitively claim was that they always put it in the piano room every night. And when they threw it out, they put it out on collection day with our mother. I don't have a lot of memories from that time, but I do remember being scared of that doll at night and putting it as far away from me as possible. But for some reason, every morning it was back with me again. On that note, apparently neither my parents nor my grandparents remembered buying that doll for me. I just had Chappy one day, and for whatever reason, I loved it. Seemed my parents and grandparents each thought the other bought it, so they didn't pay much attention to it. And to this day, I still have a nickname my family calls me. Apparently, I started calling myself by this name when I was in kindergarten. I called myself Chappy. My family still calls me that even now, but nobody seems to find it odd that my doll was also called that. But then, these sorts of strange spiritual phenomena happened a lot in our house, so I guess nobody cared. The young woman in this next story suddenly really wants an Ichimatsu doll. But why? Why is this overwhelming urge consuming her? Find out in Ichimatsu Doll. This happened back when I was a teenager. One day, I suddenly really wanted an Ichimatsu doll. Like, it was all I could think of. I just really wanted a doll. The thought consumed me. And so, I started asking customers at the shop if they knew any information about where I could buy one, if anyone took orders, how much it might cost, etc. After several days of trying to dig up anything I could, suddenly a woman replied, "Are you sure you really want it?" Suddenly, it was like I saw the light. She was right. Why on earth did I want a doll in the first place? And not just a doll, but an Ichimatsu doll specifically. Suddenly, this doll that I couldn't stop thinking about became the last thing I wanted. As we spoke, I could have sworn that an Ichimatsu doll behind the customer was glaring at me. Unsure whether it was real or not though, I did my best to forget all about it. The next 5 years passed in a blur, and I found myself getting married, giving birth, and then getting divorced. After my divorce, I returned to my parents' house, and while I was there, my older sister and her friend came to visit. We were having fun, chatting about old times, when suddenly her friend brought up something interesting. Come to think of it, there used to be a bridge near the house you lived in back then, right? Yeah, there was. There was a small bridge near the house we used to live in back when I was a teenager. It wasn't like there was anything special about it. It was just a tiny bridge. But I didn't really like it much either way. I saw a girl there, my sister's friend continued. A child wearing a kimono with her hair cut in a bob. This friend often saw people that weren't, well, of this world. The memories all came back clear as day. That Ichimatsu doll I forgot all about. Scared, I asked her a question. Was she wearing a white kimono with a red sash? She was. How did you know? It was honestly kinda scary. Suddenly her face grew larger and she charged right at me. There was no doubt in my mind that the reason why I suddenly wanted a doll, and why that woman pointed out that perhaps it wasn't actually me who wanted one, it was all because of that doll I saw glaring hatefully at me. It must have possessed me when I crossed that bridge, and perhaps it was using me to find a new body for it to possess. And yet, that woman's simple comment broke me free of its spell, and that was why it glared at me. In the end, it took me 5 years to finally discover why I suddenly wanted a doll, why a single comment broke me free of that desire, and why I saw that doll glaring at me that day. The woman in this next story finds a strange box in her yard after moving for work, but this box seems oddly targeted. Why is it there? And who put it there? Find out in Cursed Dolls. Have you ever heard of cursed straw dolls? That's what this story is about. I often had to move for work, so I lived in all sorts of different places. Sometimes in apartments, sometimes in rented houses. This story is about when I lived in a rented house in Hagi City, Yamaguchi Prefecture. I found a cheap rental house, so I decided to stay there for a while. The only real problem was that the house was deep in the mountains, and although it was quite large, it was also rather old. About a month after we moved in, my daughter found a strange box in the garden. I was certain that during our first few days off after moving in, we carefully checked everything in both the house and yard, but during that time, there was definitely no box in the garden. I was even more certain because the box my daughter brought me looked rather peculiar, something you would definitely recognize at a glance. I don't have any sixth sense whatsoever, but that box gave me a bad bad feeling. Had I made the right choice at that time, I probably could have avoided the terrifying events that followed as well. I decided to burn that creepy box. I mean, the only options for dealing with something we didn't need at the time was either to burn it or throw it out. A few days later, tragedy struck. One of my close friends had a car accident. The car went up in flames, and my friend was taken to the hospital with burns all over her body. By the time she got there, she had already passed away. A few days after that, another of my close friends suffered burns to her right arm and half her face when a bonfire at home suddenly caught on her clothes. I went to see her at the hospital and ask about what happened. Apparently, a few days before the accident, she had a dream that her entire body was burning. Now, I'm not superstitious, but I couldn't help but wonder if, I checked the garden as soon as I got home. I found the hole where we burnt the box, and the remains of it were still inside. When I reached out for it and opened the lid, a terrible chill ran down my spine. Inside were some dolls. There were 3 in total. One of them was burnt to a husk, while another was only half burnt. Another one hadn't been touched by the fire at all. They were all perfectly average Japanese dolls, all girls wearing kimonos. When I reached for the burnt doll, the charred kimono fell apart in my hands. As soon as I saw the rear of that doll, I fell back in fear. My friend's name was written on it. I couldn't see a name on the fully burnt one, but I could guess whose name it was. And the doll that wasn't burnt had my name written on it. But it was so strange. Who would do such a thing? And why to these friends in particular? I had lots of other friends after all, and nothing connected just the 3 of us. I couldn't recall ever upsetting anyone, and why would such a thing be here in this house to begin with? Did someone who lived in this house hold a grudge against me? But I didn't even know anyone who lived in Yamaguchi. It was all just so strange. I moved out of that house shortly thereafter. I took the remaining dolls to a temple, but even now, I still remember what the monk said to me when I handed them over. I will hold a service for these dolls, but I don't know if it will do much. The grudge attached to these dolls isn't human. The young man in this next story gets a rather strange gift from his grandmother, an old antique doll. He decides to take good care of it either way, and as time goes on, it seems the doll decides to repay him. But how and why? Find out in Antique Doll. When I first started junior high school, my grandmother gave me an antique doll to celebrate. It was an old doll, but it was well looked after and didn't appear to be dirty. On the contrary, it was a beautiful doll with silver hair and a mostly white gothic dress. "This doll seems to like you a lot, so please take good care of her," my grandmother said. The doll looked rather expensive and, for whatever reason, I was quite fond of it as well, so I took great care of it. One day, around a year later, I had a strange dream. In the dream, that doll appeared as a girl, around 15 to 18 or so. She bowed at me once before leaving. Filled with sadness, I screamed at her not to go, but she just kept going and then finally disappeared. As soon as I could no longer see her, I woke up. It was 5:30 in the morning. Worried about the doll, I turned to look at the shelf, but there didn't appear to be anything wrong with her. But I still couldn't stop thinking about that dream, so I got up and carefully put the doll in a box before I went to school. The day proceeded normally, and as I was walking home, suddenly I felt something push me from behind, and I tripped and fell. Not even a moment later, a tree fell where I had just been standing. Heavy rain had fallen the day before, so it seemed the ground had gone soft. I nearly died, I thought, and then I continued the rest of the way home. After washing my hands, I went to check the doll in the box. When I saw her, I froze. She had shattered into tiny pieces. Confused, I waited for my mother to get home, and then I asked her about it. She then told my grandmother, and she said she had a friend who might be able to fix it. But in the end, it was an old doll that was just damaged too badly, so there was nothing they could do. I was so upset that I cried. This doll loved you, so she's no doubt happy that she was able to protect you, my grandmother said, trying to make me feel better. At her suggestion, we took the remains of the doll to a temple the following Saturday. The chief priest there said the same thing my grandmother did. The night after the service for the doll at the temple, I dreamt about that girl again. She hugged me as I cried, and then handed something to me. I had no idea what it was, but as soon as it was in my hands, I woke up. I don't know why, but I feel like that girl became my guardian spirit, and even now, she's still watching over me. The woman in this next story appears to love collecting stuffed toys, but she also seemingly gets bored of them just as quickly. But what's really going on here, and why does she have so many of them? Find out in Stuffed Toys. This is a slightly scary story about my girlfriend. Her room was absolutely packed with stuffed toys. At first, I thought that she must really like them, but when we started living together, she didn't bring any of them with her, and for a while, we lived without any stuffed toys whatsoever. One day, while we were out on a date, we found ourselves at a flea market. We wandered around for a while, and then a stuffed toy caught my eye. There wasn't anything particularly special about it, but still, it managed to grab my attention. It was a cute horse with somewhat vacant eyes for just 200 yen. Next to me, my girlfriend stared at it, and so I bought it right away. "Do you like the horse?" I asked her. "That's Mr. Horse to you," she said. After that, wherever she went, she took Mr. Horse with her. She put him on the table when she ate, and by her pillow when she slept. She even apologized if she ever accidentally rolled onto it. Around a month later, I realized that my girlfriend was no longer carrying around Mr. Horse. It was still there in the corner of the room, but she no longer touched it. I randomly picked it up one day, and its normally hollow eyes looked wide open. How can I put it? Like how a stuffed toy's eyes normally look. After that was Mr. Bear, a white stuffed bear. Unlike Mr. Horse, she often took him with her on walks outside. But then, 2 weeks later, that also stopped, and now he sat next to the horse. Next was Mr. Cow, but they sold 2 of these. One was brown, the other white. The white one somehow ended up in my bag that I took to work, while my girlfriend carried the brown one around at home. This went on for 3 weeks, but then they too ended up next to Mr. Horse and Mr. Bear. The final stuffed animal she brought home was a chicken at the end of last year, and she said some old lady somewhere made it. We were a little late for our first shrine visit of the year, but she brought Mr. Bird with her, and then we visited a temple or something that specialized in purification ceremonies. My girlfriend gave them an offering of 5,000 yen. Then she sat next to Mr. Bird and a monk read sutras for a while. I couldn't sit still for so long, so I looked outside while I waited. When they were done, the monk got up and then returned a short while later with an elderly monk. He then took Mr. Bird with him. The monk then drove us back to the closest station. On the way, I asked what was going on, and he said, "Those who do not choose this line of work are better off not hearing." The way he specifically said hearing and not asking caught my attention. "My girlfriend has other stuffed toys at home though," I said. "Do you feel anything when you see them?" he asked. "No." "Then you have nothing to worry about." The entire ride back, my girlfriend was just looking outside. It took us about 10 minutes to reach the station, but during that time, I wasn't able to sort out what I actually wanted to ask. "Your girlfriend is a very warm-hearted person," the monk whispered to me when we arrived. After that, we visited Kyoto's Inari Shrine and my girlfriend drew the luckiest fortune of all. In the last month or so, she's won around 100,000 yen worth of gift certificates, a one-night, 2-day trip to a popular Japanese inn, and even 2 free tickets to the movies. You'd think she'd use everything herself, but she gave the movie tickets to my parents and the inn stay to her parents. "Happiness and fortune only have meaning when you can give them away," she said. As for the gift certificates, those could be used at restaurants, so she used all of them on meals with our families. She even got me a new commuter bag worth 50,000 yen. Even though she's a student who's younger than me, she seems to understand how the world works. And sometimes it feels like she's from another planet entirely. The woman in this next story often plays in her family's spare room, but inside there's a cupboard so packed with dolls that they don't all fit. And 3 dolls in particular there seem to have a life of their own. But what do they really want? Find out in The Dolls Watching TV. This isn't particularly strange or scary, but this happened in the Western-style room of our house. Sorry if it's a little long. We have a Western-style room in our house that's a guest room in pretty much name only. We have a lot of visitors, but everyone goes into the living room, and the only people that visit the Western-style room are tutors, and that's about it. And so, it inevitably became a storage room full of old books, records, and forgotten bottles of wine and whiskey and such. In the corner, there was a cupboard with a few dozen dolls. The inside was absolutely packed with them, and so there were 3 that sat on top of it, probably because they didn't fit. My grandparents bought these dolls while they were traveling around the country. Like, when they visited Aomori, they got a Nebuta Festival doll. There was also an Okinawan Ryukyu dancing doll, and an Awa Odori Festival doll from Tokushima. There were souvenirs from all over Japan, and because they all had gorgeous outfits, I often played with them when I was a kid, with my friends and cousins. It wasn't just the dolls I played with, but I often ended up spending hours in that room. I'd watch TV, play games, and even study. I'd also invite my friends over every week to play games and such in there. For me, it's that Western-style room that I have more pleasant memories of than the living room. One day, when I was playing games in the room like always, I felt someone looking at me from behind. I turned to look and all 3 dolls on the cupboard were looking in my direction. Their gazes were fixed on the TV. Something about it felt really weird, so I turned all 3 to look the other way. Another time, I was watching TV and when I turned around, again, those same 3 dolls were also looking at the screen. I turned them around several times after that, but those dolls were always looking at the TV. I figured they must have wanted to watch it, and so in the end, I decided to leave them where they were. As I grew up, I spent less time in that room, but even as a grown-up, those dolls were still always facing the TV. One day, Tales of the Unusual was on TV, but my family wanted to watch something else at the same time, so I decided to watch it on the TV in the Western-style room. It had been quite some time since I was last in there. I don't remember all the details, but on this particular episode, there was a large severed head. Like, it was so big that it reached the ceiling. This big, darkened, bald head. These sorts of shows don't usually bother me, but this time around, I was admittedly a little creeped out. As the story reached its climax, the main actress was killed or something by the head, and that was that. I was enthralled by the horror before me, but then I came back to my senses as the commercials started to play. With the show over, I stood up to turn the TV off, but then I turned around, spotting something I shouldn't have. Behind the sofa, there was a bookshelf with lots of thick books. There was also an Awa Odori doll, holding its head in its hands. The head had likely fallen off because it was so old, but it was sitting so perfectly in its hands, staring right at me. Was that even there when I entered the room? That doll should have been in the cupboard, so why was it there anyway? Various thoughts ran through my head as I stood there, frozen. But then it hit me that I should get away from there as soon as possible, so I ran to the living room. At that moment, I discovered that people can be surprisingly calm in unexpected situations. When I explained what happened to my grandmother, who owned the doll, she was like, "Which one?" and made her way towards the room. She was the type of person who was never bothered by the small details of things, and as soon as she saw the doll, she picked it up and tossed it right into the trash. It was so creepy that I was relieved it was gone, but looking back on it now, I kind of wish she had just fixed it and put it back on display instead. When a young boy's friend goes missing, they find him in a strange location. But he won't talk about what happened, and what they find nearby makes the situation all the more strange. What's really going on? Find out in Memorial Dolls. This happened when I was in elementary school, I think. Sometime during August, around the end of the summer holidays. My hometown was close to the ocean, and there was a large embankment on the shoreline. Close to that was a smaller bank, and as kids, we often played around there. One day, right as the summer holidays were coming to a close, we were playing on our skateboards near that smaller bank. Before long, I found myself feeling thirsty, so I went to a nearby vending machine to get a drink. I could still see my other friends skateboarding from the vending machine, but as I returned, I suddenly realized that one of my friends was missing. When I got back, I told the others. "Looks like Y is gone," I said, and nobody else seemed to notice he was gone either. "But he was just here a minute ago," someone said. Nobody knew where he went. At the time, it was high tide, and there were strong winds with rough waves. It'd be dangerous if he fell into the water, so we all ran around trying to find him. The area below the bank was full of thick grass, almost as tall as a person. We pushed through it, screaming Y's name. "He's over here!" one of my friends screamed, and we all rushed over. Y was lying on the ground, and the friend who screamed was next to him. Y's face was pale, and he was bent over, holding his left ankle. He was muttering something as sweat poured off his face. Realizing that he was in real trouble, we quickly put him on a bike and rushed him to the hospital, then called his parents. It turned out he had a compound fracture, but strangely, his bones all broke vertically. Y's parents thanked us, and then we went home. The first Sunday of the second semester, I searched that area where we found Y with one of my close friends. Why on earth had Y fallen there? How did he hurt himself like that? Well, it was almost like a bit of an adventure. We looked around for a while but couldn't find anything. Then my friend got bored and started skateboarding up on the bank again. Before long, I was bored too. But then I noticed something just a short distance away, an area where there was no grass. As I got closer, it appeared something had been burnt there, and there was a mountain of ashes. The air stank like burning rubber. I got even closer to inspect it, and then broke out in goosebumps all over. They were all dolls. They looked like Kyoto dolls. They had almond-shaped eyes, small lips, and had all been burnt to a crisp. There must have been 50 of them, maybe even more. One of the dolls caught my eye. It lay on the ground right in front of me. Its left ankle was burnt black and had melted off. I was so terrified that I couldn't even tell my friend about it. I just wanted to go home, so I suggested we leave for the day and rushed back. When I got home, I told my parents what happened. At first they laughed, but when I showed them the doll, suddenly their expressions hardened. They quietly told me the truth. The town we lived in, long ago, used to be nothing more than water, the ocean. The land we lived on now was reclaimed land. These reclamation efforts were harsh, and many people died. And so, a shrine was built, and various dolls dedicated there in memory of those who lost their lives. But the shrine fell into ruin, and people stopped visiting it. That shrine was close to the bank where we often skateboarded. I have no idea who burnt those dolls. I even asked why about it later, but he wouldn't say a word about what happened. Quite some time has passed since then, but even now, I still hate dolls. It doesn't matter what kind of doll it is, but when I see one, it reminds me of that time. Finally, this week, a young boy hangs out at an acquaintance's house and uncovers something horrifying about him. What on earth is going on with his family? Find out in Paper Doll. This happened when I was in the 5th or 6th grade. I can't confirm whether it's true or not, as I have no way to check, and I'm not sure whether I should be writing about it here or not either. Anyway, Big Man chocolate was really popular at the time, and I often swapped the stickers we got from them with my friend, Okun. He had lots of game consoles, like the PC Engine and Twin Famicom, and he also had countless games too, so we generally hung out at his house to play. He lived with just his father and grandmother, and his grandmother was always at home. One day, I went to his house once again to play. Usually, there were always lots of kids there, but on this day, the place was empty. It was weird not seeing the usual suspects there. "Is Koichi, my best friend at the time, not coming?" I asked. "Ah, he's not here yet, but he said he'd be coming later," Okun replied. So I went inside to wait. Okun was really into the Kunio-kun series at the time, and when I went inside, he was playing again. I wasn't very good at those games, so Ryuichi and Ryuji, who were the best at it, often helped me. Still, I always died quickly, and then had to wait forever for my next turn. I waited an hour, but there was still no sign of Koichi. Once again, I died quickly, so I had to wait until my next turn. Koichi and Okun often chatted, but we didn't really talk much, so things were a little awkward. All I could think about was how I wished Koichi would come already, and while I waited, I looked around Okun's room, which I didn't usually do. I noticed a Jackie Chan poster that was peeling off the wall. It had been stuck there with sellotape, but the corners had dried and were coming off. There was some tape on the desk, so I decided I'd fix it for him. As I pulled the dried tape off, the poster fell to the ground with a small thud. I froze. Stuck to the back was a large orange talisman. A chill ran down my spine. However, O-kun was entirely unfazed. "Ah, make sure you put that back up," he said. His lack of concern freaked me out even more. Still, I couldn't just ignore it. "Is that real?" I asked as I put the poster back up. "Yeah, probably," he said casually. I put the poster back up with trembling hands. At the same time, O-kun seemed fed up with his game and sighed as he pulled it out of the console. "Do you want to see something cool?" he then said, turning to look at me. "Sure," I replied, not sure of what else to say. He then left me alone for a bit while he went to a different room, and then he came back holding a box that was around 20 centimeters long. "Check this out," he said as he opened it. When I saw what was inside, I got chills again. It was a piece of paper in the shape of a person. "What's this?" I said, my voice trembling. "I don't really know, but apparently it's a substitute for me," he replied. I wanted nothing more than to go home, but O-kun continued. "So I'm probably going to die when I turn 18. I started to panic, but O-kun was so indifferent as he spoke that I couldn't bring myself to say anything. It took everything I had to simply ask, "Why?" "Apparently, my mother is going to come for me." I was panicking so much I had no idea what he meant. "Yeah? Really?" I tried to reply like it was nothing, and O-kun continued. "My parents got divorced when I was 5. I think it was probably because my mother was sick. Looking back on it now, I think she was ill mentally. I remember her always screaming and breaking stuff. After that, I started living here with my father and grandmother. And then, 6 months later, my mother died. Ever since then, my dad takes me to get purified once a year. At first, I had no idea why, but when I found a letter in one of his drawers one day, I finally understood why. It was a letter from my mother. When O turns 18, I'll be coming to take him back, it said. And I'm sure she will. That's why my dad gets these substitutes every year, I think, to stop that from happening." There was nothing I could say. I just wanted to go home. Then I heard somebody call O-kun's name from outside. It was Koichi. I didn't like going to O-kun's house after that. It was so creepy that it was honestly a little traumatic. O-kun and I drifted apart as well. We ended up going to different junior high schools and I pretty much forgot all about him. This year, Koichi contacted me for the first time since junior high. We chatted about this and that, reminiscing about the old days, when suddenly I remembered O-kun. I decided to ask about him. "So, how's O doing these days?" I asked. Koichi's tone immediately dropped. "Oh, yeah. He's in a coma." Apparently, he suddenly passed out one day during his final year of high school. There was no way it could be a coincidence, and he had apparently been in a coma ever since. And that's the end of my story. Because it happened a while ago, some details might be a little vague, but even now, I still clearly remember that orange talisman and the shape of that paper doll. A huge thank you and shout out to this week's Kami tier members, Emerald and Kenneth Kawamoto. It's thanks to your support, along with everyone else, that I'm able to keep doing this show, so thank you very much. Don't forget to check out Toshiden, Exploring Japanese Urban Legends Volume 4, out right now, and check out our merchandise store at kowabana-shop.fourthwall.com. And if you'd like to chat about this week's stories, come and join us in the Kowabana Discord. You can find that link in the description or on kowabana.net. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TaraADevlin for exclusive bonus stories and extras, or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/KowabanaJapan for all sorts of Japanese horror you won't find anywhere else. Thanks guys, stay safe, have a happy new year, and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana. True Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.